So for today's local town hall, it's sponsored by the China Research Center, which is affiliated with Ivan Island College of Liberal Arts of Georgia Institute of Technology. The other sponsor is the Emory International Relations Association, which is a student organization at Emory University whose mission is to get Emory community people to be more aware of international affairs. It organizes activities, inviting guest speakers, does fundraising, but one most important thing the association does is to be involved. Model UN. They're hosting Model UN for college students as well as high school students. And finally, the third sponsor of this event is the Carter Center, whose founder, almost 42 years ago, worked with Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping, and jointly they made the courageous decision to normalize relationship between the US and China. That relationship now is being threatened. And that's why we have one of the distinguished scholar of the bilateral relationship in the US to offer a presentation. So I would like Wendy Avelis to introduce our speaker. Wendy?
Thank you, Professor Leo. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am Wendy Aviles, and I'm honored to be introducing Dr. Lau Jared Goldstein, who will offer the keynote presentation entitled Meeting China Halfway, How to Avert War and Reduce Militarized Rivalry in U.S.-China Relations. Dr. Goldstein is a research professor in the China Maritime Studies Institute, CMSI, at the Naval War College. He's also the founding director of the CMSI and author of dozens of articles on Chinese security policy, focusing on Chinese undersea warfare. On the broader subject of the U.S.-China relations, Goldstein published the book Meeting China Halfway in 2015. Over the last several years, Goldstein has focused on the North Korea crisis, and finally, Goldstein speaks Russian as well as Chinese, and is an affiliate of Naval War College's New Russia Maritime Studies Institute. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lau Goldstein.
Professor Goldstein, the floor is yours. Would you like to share your screen? And for our audience, if you have questions, post them to the chat. Once Professor Goldstein finishes the presentation, we'll open the floor for Q&A.
Hi there, everyone. Good evening. I'm very excited to be joining you. That's a tough act to follow. Let's see. But I think you can see my slides now, and I'm really thrilled to be here. As you can see, I'm a huge admirer of President Carter and all he's done as president, and afterwards, his achievements in U.S.-China relations, let alone the rest of the world, are incredible. And I have had the honor to visit the Carter Center before and lecture, and I'm honored to do so again. This is a pivotal time in the relationship. I think that is frequently said, but you know, I come to you tonight with, and I don't want to give anybody nightmares, but I'm very concerned about this relationship, and this title that I put on tonight. Really, I hesitated to write even such a title, but I think it has now come to that where we have to be very clear-eyed about the possibility of war. Ray Dalio just mentioned the Thucydides Trap, and I am indeed preoccupied with, this is what keeps me up at night, the possibility that somehow our two great nations could slide into war. So I'll address that issue. It seems to me, I mean, the good news here is that I think if we take certain steps that this can be avoided. As Mr. Dalio said, there are several cases where rising power did not get into war with the hegemonic power. So the question is how to do that. And this is why I'm so glad to share some ideas with you. I noticed, by the way, we have many heavy hitters in the audience tonight. So I'm really, you know, and friends as well. And I'm really looking forward to dialogue. So I'll try to run through these slides very quickly, so we might share some ideas, and eager to hear your ideas on this. So for those of you who don't know me, I am mostly a China specialist. I do some, you can see there, here I am with Matteo Ricci, the original, as the father of all China sinologists. But I also do work on Russia too. So this gives me kind of maybe a little bit of a unique perspective. But at Naval War College, I do tend to focus on naval issues, including undersea warfare. I'm very concerned that we are headed, if not already in, a kind of new Cold War with both Russia and China. If I had to give my ideas a bumper sticker, besides meeting China halfway, I would say that we should avoid trivia, as George Marshall told Kennan before he started the policy planning department. Avoiding trivia, meaning we should focus on the really big issues, and that foremost among them is preventing the outbreak of war. Now, if you look at my little list here, I'll be covering quite a few issues, but these are, I see here 5 flashpoints, from India to Taiwan, and I put Taiwan in red, and I would have put Taiwan in flashing red if I knew how, because it really is that dangerous at this very moment. Just though to let you know, though, what kind of things I'm working on day to day. Here's a Russian document I came upon about a year ago, which I found really stunning because it explains how if Russia were to allow China to deploy Chinese submarines into its Arctic ports, that would be a huge strategic great leap forward for China's submarine force. So, the fact that Russian strategists are discussing this is profoundly concerning. And it maybe shows you the direction of where world politics is going. It's very troubling indeed. I'm working on a book now on Russia-China relations, so you'll forgive me if that's kind of my current preoccupation. But tonight I'm going to speak more about a book I wrote a few years ago, and this was on U.S.-China relations. Now, it's been since I wrote that book, it came out in 2015, the book called Meeting China Halfway, really, how to put it, the relationship has gone in exactly the opposite direction that I would have hoped. That is, we have more and more tension. Here you see Sean Spicer when he started talking about the South China Sea immediately after the Trump administration took over. Then China very quickly started to parade these massive new missile launchers, DF-41 here, and I began to see things I'd never seen before in Chinese military publications, such as this map of a nuclear impact point on the United States. Very troubling indeed. And, I heard somebody characterize the Trump administration policy toward China recently as something like sledgehammer type policy. Well, we might say that these policies have been mostly designed by the chief advisors on China that President Trump has had. Michael Pillsbury, Peter Navarro, you may want to look these people up. You can see their books here. They are people I've met in the course of my, as growing up among sinologists and so forth, but I do think that we have to question the direction that the relationship has gone as a result of this kind of sledgehammer approach. And, I will say, even really highly respected members of the sinology community, Min-Shin Pei, for example, who I remember studying in very carefully his work in graduate school, but he, seems to admire very much this approach by the Trump administration, which is not afraid to push back against China. And many Americans indeed have applauded that aspect of the Trump administration foreign policy. Now, I must tell you, though, and here you see, I'm not going to show a video clip, but you'll see that's Anthony Blinken. He's slated to be one of Biden's top foreign policy advisors. But, I can detect already, though, among Biden's chief advisors, a rather hardline approach, I would say. not just Tony Blinken, but here you see, you might look at this foreign affairs article by Michelle Flournoy, that everybody's picking her to be the next Secretary of Defense. But here she says that, in her mind, the main problem is the erosion of American deterrence, meaning in her mind, it's all about how do we have the proper capabilities to make sure that, we sort of keep China in the box that it's in. And to me, I think that's a very, let's say that's not the most constructive way to look at U.S.-China relations. And here you see another major advisor to the president-elect. Here you see Eli Ratner. Again, it's quite a hard line type position. And so I guess what I'm saying is I don't see a lot of change coming in the next administration. Hopefully there'll be some change in a progressive direction. But I'm concerned that a lot of the approach that was started in the last few years is going to continue. And the tension likely will continue, including on the military security side, which I'm most concerned with. Now, just as Washington has its many hawks, so they have proliferated in Beijing. And here you can see that when I watch Chinese TV at night, I see some pretty, hawkish viewpoints. It's true, I do tend to watch the military channel in China, that's Channel 7. So here you see a critique saying these moves by the US on Taiwan have been 非常危险的. So as you can see, there's kind of red light blinking from the Chinese point of view as well. And here's another statement. Again, suggests that very strong statement by the Chinese military saying, we have the capability and will not tolerate sort of foreign interference. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is Washington has its hawks and the same is true in Beijing. I just picked up these images actually watching last night because there's a major new exhibit on the Korean War. I have a lot of interest in the Korean War, but apparently China's leadership does as well. And I'll tell you, they've been giving a huge amount of coverage. There's a brand new exhibit in Beijing. I guess that's getting pulling in a lot of crowds. But, it seems to me it's very disturbing, this kind of, not that they shouldn't memorialize the war, and we'll do the same, by the way. I want to wish all our veterans out there who are listening a happy Veterans Day. But the point is, in a way, the way they're memorializing the Korean War seems to be kind of, as it were, a kind of motivational discussion about that China back in the day dared to fight against the United States. And as you can see from this speech, which was, I think, summarized very well in the New York Times on the 23rd of October. And please look up the article yourself and read it carefully, because it really does reveal a kind of thinking about the meaning of the Korean War and what it means for China today. And it's quite disturbing, as I said, when you look at the details here, as you can see, that China might dare, regardless of the cost, as you can see. Okay, so this to me, you have a climate both in Washington, D.C. and in Beijing that is almost starting to feel like a kind of sense of inevitability of this kind of Thucydides Trap type conflict. Now, as Mr. Dalio said, though, in effect, he said, what matters is relative capabilities. And here, of course, back in the days of the Korean War, China was very weak, and America really was at its apogee of strength after World War II. And so today, the situation is extremely different now. We have really two militaries that are facing off in the Western Pacific that are, kind of approaching a sort of parity, I think we can say. That is, the U.S. remains stronger in certain things, well, China has a lot of strength in other things. And I could show you plenty of pictures of ships, and I'll show you a few, but this, just very simply, this new cruiser has a lot of people where I work talking, and we just finished a report on it, very impressed with it. But probably the things you don't hear about in the headlines so much, these missiles, for example, and only China has this capability, a capability to launch ballistic missiles against ships at sea. It's a totally new kind of capability. Some have even said that this capability makes even any kind of naval surface ship obsolete. Can you imagine that? It's something we have to consider. We don't know what warfare in the 21st century looks like, but China has a certain vision of it. It's taking it very seriously. And if that wasn't enough, those other types of missiles, here's another kind of missile, which China revealed recently. This is a hypersonic missile, something that the United States, Russia actually has deployed a hypersonic weapon, but the United States has yet to deploy such a weapon. But again, this is thought to be capable of striking ships at sea and very hard to defend against. So these are the kind of thing that keeps military strategists up at night at this point. But China's wielding all kinds of new military capabilities. And I'm sorry to, again, I don't want to give anybody nightmares, but, this part of my job is to keep an eye on this stuff. But we see a lot of interest in, for example, airborne forces. And the truth is, not many militaries still cultivate this kind of capability. China seems to be extremely serious about it, though. I mean, if thinking about it, dropping people out of airplanes at night, dropping vehicles out of airplanes, okay, this is only done by a military that's quite intent on developing very serious capability here. Another new dimension of China's military power concerns helicopters, and really about 10 or 15 years ago, we would have said China's helicopter fleet was laughable, but we don't say that anymore. And really, they're making giant strides here. And this is changing the balance in the Western Pacific, including across the Taiwan Strait. And I'll talk to Taiwan shortly, but also the development of special forces, okay? And since 2001, the United States has also put a premium on special forces, but China has been relentlessly developing these capabilities, including snipers, divers, and the like, and of course that gives them abilities to strike quickly and in a stealthy way. Now I do focus mostly on the submarine force, and here there have been quite dramatic improvements in China's submarine force that I've been tracking over a period. But we may say the United States continues to have an advantage here, but it's clear to me that China is watching very much where we go with our submarine force, and also developing capabilities like this anti-submarine aircraft they're working on. It shows a very serious ambition on China's part to build a first-class Navy, and one probably on par with the United States. Now, if you are curious about the military balance, I urge you to look at this piece by Rand that came out in 2015. But I will tell you this, I think this report still underrates China's military power. And I'm somebody who thinks that probably in general, Westerners seem inclined to downplay China's military capabilities. But had I more time, I would explain to you all the nuances here. But I think this, more or less, we're generally underestimating China's military power. And actually, I've written this up in China Quarterly. You can look at this article if you're a scholarly article with all the footnotes and so forth, where I go through my assessment, which I guess from an American point of view is quite a bit more pessimistic than most of those assessments out there. And in a nutshell, folks, and I want to move away from the military nuts and bolts, and talk, more larger strategy issues. But really, the key to understanding this whole situation is to understand the distances, and geography, if you will, is trumps. It is the main factor. That is, two countries that are more or less roughly equivalent in military power. If the battle is fought off of China's shores, then it's very hard for the United States to bring equivalent forces and firepower against that. So China has this distinct geographic advantage within its own proximate regions that we just have to respect. Okay, now, so I've shared a lot of pessimism, but occasionally I am feeling optimistic. This article is a little bit old, but it gives you just a taste, I think, that's important of Chinese viewpoints of this, that some, I said there are a lot of hawks in Beijing, but there are also a lot of doves, a lot of people who are striving for peace, who see a peaceful future, who want to continue China's peaceful rise. And here's one of them. In fact, interestingly, he mentions Terrell Lefravel's work, which shows that China generally has not opted to use force and has peacefully settled a lot of its disputes. And indeed, I think if we put in the balance, and I'll give you a kind of, as it were, a plus minus on China's foreign policy, but I think there are a lot of pluses here that are often neglected by the press. Here you can see a lot of them, but I've looked, for example, at the Ebola crisis. And well before COVID-19, we had Ebola, and China acted in a very positive way, and really on par with the United States, actually. So, we have to give them some credit occasionally for doing some good out there in the world. And this, I think, we should recognize and encourage. And really, what I tried to do with my 2015 book here was to develop what I call cooperation spirals. These cooperation spirals, I mean, it's really rather intuitive. I think even in interpersonal relations, you have a similar phenomena, but the idea is how do we, you can't necessarily leap into a grand bargain with China. I think you want these kind of gradual steps to build trust based on reciprocity, fairness, enforceability. Social scientists have shown, through social psychology, that this is essential for building trust. You have to iterate through small steps if you want to build cooperation. So I think there is a social science basis for this. Now, let me address, as it were, the 4 or 5 biggest flashpoints. And one of them, I think we have to say, involves India, right after the summer's clash high up in the Himalayas. There's also been tensions at sea, though, and China is quite concerned with India's Navy. And the United States is involved with exercises with the Indian Navy. So it's something that we have to, that the United States is engaged in. So, I'll just throw out a couple of suggestions here. I won't walk you through all the spirals. We just don't have time. But I just to give you a taste of what kind of ideas that I'm advocating here for a kind of compromise. So in this spiral, you will see that, one of the things I'm interested in, how the U.S. can alter the relationship between China and India. And one way is, I think, if we continue to reduce our military footprint in Central Asia, which at one time, by the way, was quite large. We had bases in Kyrgyzstan also, and in Uzbekistan. We've been reducing those. I think we should be leaving Afghanistan. That will be well received in China. And I think China probably does have a role, maybe a bigger role in the United States in the future of Afghanistan. It's not a bad thing. That's in our interest. And one of our joint interests with China, we have common interests, is that we should support Pakistan. And this could involve even a Chinese pledge not to build military bases in Pakistan. That would help to stabilize what is really a rather volatile relationship. In this book, though, I have a whole chapter on the China-India-US triangle. So I think that's going to be really essential for this coming century. Now, the Japan-US-China triangle is also essential. And here, the history looms large. I would urge anybody who hasn't seen this movie, it's not a Chinese movie, it's not an American movie, it's a German movie, actually, about a German. So if you don't know who John Rabe is, please take a look at this film. But the history is important to address. There are many issues in Japan-China relations to address, and we're hoping for better times. But to me, this relationship is not hardwired for conflict. I think we can help China and Japan to move beyond the history. And one way would be some practical steps that I advocate, for example, and by the way, a lot of some of my suggestions are directed toward Americans and others at Chinese, right? And here, for example, China accepting the median line in the East China Sea would be a powerful signal that they were ready to compromise, and we could urge Japan to accept joint administration of the Senkaku Diaoyu. To me, and I know many Japan specialists just fell out of their chair, but to me, it's going to take these kind of steps if we want to see positive movement in these crucial relationships. But I do think in the long term that it is possible that China and Japan could get along well. They have a lot of common interests, actually. Okay, moving along to the South China Sea. I know the South China Sea is taken, whoops, excuse me, got ahead of myself, but the South China Sea has taken up lots of newsprint in the last 10 years. I have been very clear with my position that the United States should not get involved in a war over rocks and reefs. I maintain that position, even though it's true China in the meantime has built up its reef bases considerably. And here you see an illustration of what those kind of reef bases might, you know, the way China imagines them. And I sure as a Navy person don't like to see this carrier burning in the center, which is obviously a illustration of the kind of tensions that we're having. So we need to put a lid on these tensions, in my view. And while I don't think this is as dangerous as the Taiwan issue, I do think we have to be cautious here. And some of the ideas that I've been pushing in the South China Sea include the imperative for China to undertake substantive joint development. 共同开发, as I said, that is what China has said its actual policy is in the South China Sea, and we should hold them to it. And by the way, there's good news on this front recently, is that the Philippines and China have actually taken some concrete steps toward joint development recently. And to me, that is really the only solution to this very complex problem. I'm happy to talk about other steps here, but I'm moving towards some other issues as well here. And North Korea has been on all of our minds, really. I traveled to the North Korean border, actually, the China and North Korean border twice in the last couple of years. Here's you can see in the lower left-hand corner is a picture I snapped on what is supposed to be the 最美丽的高铁. So this was maybe the most beautiful of all the high-speed rails in China that's built right down to the North Korean border. Pretty amazing ride. But I have put forward some proposals, and you can see my article from North Korea Review that I wrote a couple of years back, where I tried to suggest that we actually have to support, instead of trying to build antagonism within the China-North Korea relationship, we should be doing the opposite. We want to strengthen that relationship, and that might enable denuclearization, or at least a freeze. And indeed, we have seen a freeze, partly thanks to China's good work here. So to me, that's important. We should recognize that. Now, as far as, you know, steps that could be taken here, you know, one of the things I talked about was China proposing a 4-power Yellow Sea patrol. The Yellow Sea has all kinds of issues with mines and, sea mines, and also a lot of fisheries issues. And so I could see a lot of reasons why we may want to undertake this 4-power patrol that would obviously include South Korea. That's critical. Now you will see, you know, some discussion of some withdrawal of US personnel from South Korea. I'm in favor of some modest withdrawals, particularly on a symbolic level, to pull North Korea into kind of a cycle of cooperation that involves some steps toward disarmament. So that's a complicated, we could do a whole lecture on the North Korea issue. I've thought about it a lot, but it is critical to peace in East Asia for sure. Now, Taiwan, and let me check the time here because I don't want to overstay my welcome. And you all are staying up late for me. I'm very honored. But you know, Taiwan is, to me, is the most dangerous place in the world, bar none. And I think but more dangerous than the Korean Peninsula, more dangerous than the Kashmir. We have to consider the fact that this could lead to, you know, even to a World War type situation between the U.S. and China. You know, it's sort of made for Hollywood, if you will, but you know, we need to take this situation very seriously, and I fear that you know, we're too dismissive of it and just kind of hope things blow over. A lot of American strategists, I think, basically assume that China is bluffing, and that's very dangerous, to my estimate. And at the same time, I think many Chinese assume the U.S. is bluffing. Well, folks, that is how you sleepwalk into a conflict, when both sides kind of assume the other is bluffing, and neither are willing to take steps toward compromise. So you know, to me, this situation has become much more complicated and much more tense, partly because of the Hong Kong protests. And I'm sure the people in Hong Kong would have no idea that they were having these kind of second order effects. But, this, as you can see in the center of my screen here, center of your screen, it says that one country, two systems is dead. This suggests that the pathway that Deng Xiaoping had developed for a kind of peaceful unification, that may be dead. And that has a lot of Chinese concern that Taiwan will split forever. And they find that unacceptable, which now raises the possibility of kind of real conflict here. So what am I proposing here? Well, to me, there does have to be some kind of change of course. To my estimate, the US has tried to kind of pull Taiwan closer and closer, looking at the military balance. I'm very disturbed by it, hoping deterrence would carry the day. I don't think it's possible, honestly. I don't think that defense of Taiwan is feasible, either from Taiwan's point of view or from the US point of view. So, that may be shocking to some people, but that is my reading of the military situation. And the political situation has to be linked to the military situation. So I'm advocating for, certain steps toward compromise. And that would mean a gradual shut off of the arms supply pipeline, starting with closing the military office in the American Institute of Taiwan. That's essentially the US embassy there. And I think China might reciprocate by pulling missiles back. So we can talk about the different steps here, but in my view, there has to be some kind of de-escalation here, because what I see is the opposite, is just continuous escalation. And I could walk you through the steps that I've seen in the last year, but it's exactly the opposite of what I would recommend. So again, we really, we need to, let's put it this way. If you had asked me 10 years ago, what's the probability of a US-China war over Taiwan, I would have said it's probably 1 to 2%, maybe lower. Today, it's as high as 15 to 20%. That is way too high, folks. We're gambling with our future, and the future for our children, the future of the planet, really, is in the balance. So we can't accept that. Well, let me just close up with a couple more slides here. We won't go through all of this, but I just want to, we can try to put, if you will, Chinese foreign policy, and evaluate it in terms of, what's good and what's bad, if you will. It's kind of a simple way to do it, but, we're really disturbed by the rapid military modernization, the repression of minorities and so forth. There are things to be worried about, absolutely. And yet, we have to take a balanced view and see that China has not resorted to force in almost 40 years. That's really incredible, actually, if you think about it. So to me, if you take a balanced view, we can be more positive about world order as it's developing, as China rises. Now, I haven't mentioned climate change. I do have a chapter in my book, though. To my estimate, that is really the biggest issue. That is the issue we should be focused on. I hope the Biden administration will put that back in its priority place. It is the most important issue facing the world. And I do think under the Obama administration, actually, it was given that pride of place. And huge achievements were made during that time in terms of sort of, how to put it, pulling China along. And China has made a new commitment. So I think, the next step really is to bring India along and some of the others as well. But China has a long way to go too. And I think they have been backsliding a little bit because of US-China tension. So we could talk about that. But to me, all these crisis issues and the militarized rivalry take us away from what is really the biggest threat to the planet, other than, some kind of nuclear war. Okay, well, since I wrote the book, just a couple of parting shots here as I've thought more about the evolution of world order. And I tell you, I, for a long time, was a big UN skeptic. I thought it was more or less worthless talk shop, didn't do much. And when they did send troops, they seemed to make a muck of it. I've really changed my view, though, just reflecting more on how world order is developing. I do think that we have to re-examine the United Nations. After all, Roosevelt was no dummy. He knew a thing or two about both China and Russia, and he, could look and survey. That's my alarm telling me to wind it up. But to me, the 5 policeman model is not not such a bad one. We shouldn't be in a hurry to discard it. I think we might want to come back to this. After all, look at these pictures. For example, here you see, this is in Lebanon, okay, and you see Chinese troops are coaching people through a demining exercise. Well, think about that. That's pretty amazing. Here's Chinese peacekeepers in South Sudan, both pretty dangerous places, right? Now, by the way, there are hardly any Americans under blue helmets. But to me, if you want to kind of, as it were, hope for a future of cooperation and one in which China is kind of, as it were, a responsible stakeholder, then this to me seems like exactly the route we should think about where Roosevelt wanted us to go and consider it. After all, he was used to dealing with pretty gnarly characters like Joseph Stalin here, right? But he did it because he knew he had to. That's kind of being a realist. And part of that is embracing multipolarity there. And I know there's a whole, many international relations experts who reject multipolarity out of hand. They think it's, inherently unstable and so forth. But I think, we have no choice but to try to look for the upsides, look for the silver lining. I think I'm going in reverse order here, but let's rediscover the Treaty of Westphalia. What did that say in a nutshell? I think people are rolling their eyes saying it's late, Lyle, to start talking about Westphalia, but there was a key moment at the Treaty of Westphalia where they, really settled something very profound for European history. And the idea was because Germany had been riven by this terrible war for 30 years, where it was totally destroyed because they couldn't make up their mind whether they should be Catholics or Protestants. But in this treaty, they codified that every country should choose its own, system of cultural and its own style of governance. And really, we need to rediscover that and allow countries to have their own path. I think that's absolutely critical. And that should allow us the kind of nation building at home that we are really much in need of. And again, if you're saying to yourself, why are we talking about all this military stuff? We should be talking about the pandemic and climate change. I absolutely agree. And what I'm trying to do is, take these pots that are boiling off, turn down the heat. Let's start to build a more cooperative environment where we can focus on the pandemic and climate change, because those are really the main threats. And the other threats really are just in our heads, to be honest. Okay, and one last parting shot here is, just as I look through the evidence here, I'm very disturbed to see things like this, where here's a strategy for China's layout in the Atlantic. And it says that, the South China Sea has become more prominent to contain China's rise, but they can return the favor by putting pressure on the U.S. in the Atlantic, folks, to give us misgivings about pushing China around in its backyard. So to me, this is exactly what we don't want. It's the full flowering of a kind of Cold War that takes over the entire planet and, maybe more destructive and dangerous than the first Cold War. So this is what we need to avoid. But thanks very much, folks, for hearing me out, and we are very eager to hear your questions and your comments, and like to hear your ideas about how to try to bring this dangerous relationship into a better place. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing so I can see people too.
Thank you, Professor Goldstein. I think the earlier national town hall is more philosophical. Yours is more with sound and fury. You really have brought the audience, from somewhere in the midair, to the ground. Summer and Wendy, they're going through chat to identify questions and pose questions to you. So I will just pose the first question to you. Your book, Meeting China Halfway, came out 5 years ago. So in these 5 years, in terms of, I think, almost 100 recommendations to both sides, to come into the middle, are there anyone that getting close to become a policy, either on China's side or on the US side? And secondary to that is, have you been criticized? Because you work in Naval War College. Are there people from the military saying, this professor is too pacifist. He's too soft on China, that have you ever encountered that criticism? If you could share that with the audience. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Yawei. Yeah, those are two challenging questions, I would say. I'm counting on you to fire some softballs here. No, just kidding there. Well, I'll take the second one first. It is a bit of a tricky situation. I mean, I'm a professor who has the interesting job of working in a government institution. And now, of course, when I signed up to work at Naval War College, I knew very well that the Navy was going to play a critical role in the U.S.-China relationship. So, I'm very proud to work for the Navy and at Naval War College. I think they have supported me, and it really is a wonderful place to work. And the good news is I really have never felt in a major way that been pressured to kind of take a certain viewpoint. That said, though, yes, I am in a bit of a battle. I would say there has been a kind of major change of assessment among the faculty toward a much more pessimistic view. We can talk about many of the reasons for that. And by the way, I certainly do agree that China has as it were, also played a role in fostering a lot of these tensions. Both sides have been pushing the envelope, as it were, on the escalation ladder. No question, China's fortifications in the South China Sea has raised a lot of hackles. I tell people when they look at the South China Sea, I say, imagine the Caribbean. That is really how China views the South China Sea. It's not to say that, in the same way we don't own the Caribbean, and yet in some ways we do own the Caribbean, and many American naval strategists, certainly 100 years ago, when they thought a lot about the Caribbean, would have said, yes, we need to control the Caribbean. The Monroe Doctrine is sort of premised on the idea that no other power would be permitted to have any kind of serious power. So it's fair to say, Yawei, that I am fighting the tide, as it were. But I think, my colleagues do seem to value hearing a kind of different perspective. And I do hope very much that the Biden administration will maintain the ability of all researchers, but including government researchers, to get to China frequently. Certainly that's helped to, my understanding of different perspectives. As far as have any of my ideas really come to fruition? Well, I guess I'm sad to say that it's really, like I said, gone in the opposite direction, with tensions blossoming unfortunately, more and more, and that's been unfortunate. But
get too many passes this time.
On the, like I said, a couple of things have kind of fortuitously come true, though. Central Asia, for example, has seen a natural kind of decrease, as it were, in the U.S. presence there that has, I think, probably could enable a more constructive approach. And I think the U.S. essentially should leave Central Asia and allow the other powers to take the lead. It is part of multipolarity. That's kind of a logical outcome. I also mentioned, you may recall, in the South China Sea, that the Philippines and China, a lot of Americans very disturbed by the way the Philippines has gone, and certainly there are disturbing elements of it, but the Philippines pulling a little closer to China, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think possibly they could come to a compromise that the United States could live with, and we could decrease tensions in the South China Sea in that way. So that, there are some hopeful developments out there. It's not all escalation, although a lot of it is. Okay. Other questions, though? Do you want to feed me the questions, Yawei?
No, Wendy.
I can read them.
Okay, great.
I just want to echo Yawei's sentiments. Thank you so much, Professor Goldstein, for sharing your insights. I feel like I learned so much, and I'm sure others feel the same. The first question, the next question is from Leo. He said, China most likely won't be firing the first shot. What would happen if other regional players fire the first shot and situations quickly escalate to a point of U.S. determining its involvement imminent?
Yeah, thank you, Leo. I think I recall a meeting not so long ago and it's nice to have you here. I think that you're probably right that China's approach is that they will not fire the first shot, and think about that. I hope everybody will reflect on that for a minute, because I do see that in Chinese military publications, almost like a doctrinal principle that China will not fire the first shot. So that's profoundly good, and it shows that they understand restraint. And a lot of people have been disturbed, for example, by Chinese use of Coast Guard forces in the South China Sea. They use their water cannons, and they'll often pull the boats up and maybe even ram the other boats. And so certainly not safe seamanship by any stretch of the imagination. On the other hand, I often say, what would you prefer, that the Chinese Navy came in and started shooting? No, I don't think you prefer that either. So, I mean, in some respect, I think it's fair to say that if China wants to have a Coast Guard that kind of pushes people around, well, so be it. To me, that's not a big danger to U.S. national interests. It's certainly better than a Chinese Navy that's going on some kind of rampage and destroying ships here and there. Now, there is an exception, and you're probably aware of that. And I believe a professor, a very wise Chinese strategist who I know at Fudan University, published a piece about a month ago, a very disturbing piece in the Global Times, where he actually said, well, we won't fire first except, and he made the argument that China needs to realize that a great power sometimes does need to fire first. Now, is that argument persuasive? Well, I hope not, of course, but I think many in China will say yes, on the Taiwan issue in particular, China may fire first, and in that case, of course, we may be in a shooting war. My position on Taiwan, though, is quite clear. And this is not a popular position. I'm not going to run for office with this position, but I will say it nonetheless, because I think this is a civil war that has continued into the present, and that the United States should not defend Taiwan. I think Taiwan needs to enter negotiations and move toward a settlement. The current situation is not sustainable, and the United States, even if it wanted to defend Taiwan, I don't believe it's actually feasible from a military point of view, which is kind of important, right? If you're going to try to form an alliance, or some people are talking about it kind of reinvigorating an alliance that was actually abrogated in the late 70s under Carter, actually. So I don't think that is in the U.S. interest at all. And there was Carter was very wise to abrogate that treaty. And, people today need to reflect on the wisdom of a whole lot of diplomats going back through the years, all the way back to Kissinger, who put this relationship on a positive trajectory. And it takes a lot of Americans, scholars, diplomats, the public to guard U.S.-China relations against these kind of waves that come at it. But I could tell you, I do not think it's in the U.S. national interest to go to war over Taiwan. Let me be quite emphatic on that point. Next question.
Thank you so much. That was very thorough. The next question, they were wondering if you have any predictions for China policies under the Biden administration, particularly with regards to trade, education, and health collaboration.
Well, there I'm quite optimistic. To me, I think I have seen a variety of positive signals. If one looks to the Obama administration, for example, like I said, to me, they did put the right things first. They did put climate change at the top of the agenda, and he was willing to put other things aside to make time for that and really push China on climate change. And I think real progress was made. So I think in the areas that were just mentioned, education and healthcare, the Democrats have tended to be more constructive in the sense of saying, hey, we're going to agree to disagree on certain issues, but we're going to, on certain other issues, there's a lot of space for cooperation. And to me, that is a more mature approach. I would like to see them go even further. I think, unfortunately, many on that side of the spectrum have also kind of, they tend to say, well, let's cooperate on clean energy and education, all those issues, and we'll just, put off the hard issues for another time. Well, we all know, that, even issues like North Korea and things like that, we wish they would just sort of disappear somehow. They're not disappearing, they're still with us, even decades later. And sometimes they get more and more dangerous. So to me, I would like to see leaders bravely take up these hard issues instead of kicking the can constantly down the road. That to me is, somewhat irresponsible, right? We don't want do you want your children to be getting ready for war over Taiwan, or would you like to actually make some hard decisions today that enable a peaceful settlement of the issue? I think we can do that.
Wendy, you want to bring the next question?
Sorry, I don't have the questions. There's a power outage, so I think Summer has the rest.
Yeah, I got them. So in regards to Taiwan, actually, someone was wondering, how do you get both sides to know that the other side is not bluffing?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. Well, part of it is, the sad thing about international politics that I've observed over quite a long time of looking at it is, and through my reading of history, is that people rarely know themselves if they're bluffing. I mean, if you asked any members of Congress or leaders, ask them a tough question, say, are you ready to, how many American lives are you willing to lose over Taiwan? Oh, they'll kind of laugh at you and say, we're not, it's never going to come to that. And we don't really want to think about that. And yet the same person will advocate for a kind of escalation measures, escalating the conflict more. So to me, that's kind of a cop-out. And I think that we ourselves ought to be extremely clear about it and say, what are you willing to go to war for? It's very important. And, I think in a way, China has done that. They have said, a certain category of issues are what they call core interests. And the definition of a core interest is what the country is willing to go to war for. By the way, some American strategists have kind of adopted this similar discourse, which is interesting in itself. Maybe we're learning from Chinese strategists, but what I'm saying is, Americans, first of all, I don't think many of them could find Taiwan on a map if they had to, which should tell you something, nor have they really thought over what it would look like if their country fell into a war with China. So I'm very disturbed by that. I mean, to me, that's kind of the definition of what could be called sleepwalking. You don't want to sleepwalk into a war. That would be the really foolhardy and likely disastrous. So a much smarter approach is to think these issues through ahead of time, and I think that can be done. And I think we can design a defensive strategy that does, take account of, we don't know what China's will be like in the future. And, there is a small probability that China could emerge as kind of an aggressive nationalist state that really threw its weight around. I don't think it's likely, but it is possible. Okay, I admit that. Well, what to do then? I think, we can have a defensive strategy, one that preserves our alliances, say, with Japan and Philippines, but it's a defensive one. It says, we're not going to defend every rock and reef, but we are, if China were to attack, the main island of Luzon or Okinawa or something like that, of course, the U.S. would be involved. And I support that. So to me, it's a matter of drawing a realistic red line. But we as Americans have to do that. And I encourage the young people here that are listening that as much as you don't want to think about these things, you really must think about them some and think about what is worth major risks. And the reason I say that partly is because it's not just the risk of war. There is a risk of war. Hopefully it is not very high. I said I put it at about 15%. To me, that's way too high. But it's worse than that, folks, because your billions, hundreds of billions of your taxpayer money is going toward feeding this rivalry when it should be going toward, a better health system and a better education system and a better environment and things like that. So, I could say that as a member of, somebody who gets a paycheck from Defense Department. I need to tell you that this money could be spent in better ways. Okay, hopefully I'm not talking myself out of a job, but really, this is a profound misuse of resources, and we need to improve our relations with China, frankly, with Russia as well, and we need to radically decrease, I would say, the amount of resources put toward militarized rivalry, put it toward other things. By the way, the pandemic response, one reason it's been weak is because we have not put adequate resources toward this.
So Lyle, we have a professor at Jilin University. He is extending an invitation to you to visit his university. You know, Jilin obviously is just right across from North Korea. And I think he just recently traveled to North Korea. So Dr. Wang, you'd like to say something to Professor Goldstein?
Yes, thank you. Okay, yes. Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, my name is Wang Li. I'm teaching at the Jilin University, and I returned back to Dandong last 2 weeks ago for the anniversary of I gave the comments on the Korean War. Of course, now in China we don't call the Korean War, we call the resist American aggression and aid the Korean people. The Korean War is a civil war between the two Koreas. That is not the business of China. That is official definition. Very interesting. But you're welcome to China, to Jilin, and I will be your tour guide and bodyguide to Dandong first. Second, regarding Taiwan, I fully agree with you that the issue of Taiwan is closely related to the ruling party, because Taiwan was conceded to the run away by the defeating of China 100 years ago, and also many Chinese believe that the Chinese Communist Party missed the opportunity to reunify China because of the Korean War. So now I don't think the Chinese government and the leaders will miss any opportunity, will give any chance to let Taiwan independent. That is a very dangerous game. So if you can tell the people outside on the both sides of the Chinese is better. Thank you very much. Okay, my question is that regarding South China Sea, Chinese government has repeatedly said the South China Sea is the common property of the region. That is a huge retreat or change from the sovereignty to the current situation. However, I have seldom read any scholars, maybe that is my fault, okay? Not many people talk about the China has repeated that the South China Sea is not a part of China anymore. China say some part of South China Sea belong to China, but China has not said over the past year or years. I don't remember. I can double check. China hasn't claimed that the whole region of South China Sea belong to China. No, I don't think so. And also publicly, officially say that South China Sea is the common property of the region. So what do you think about that? Do you think China has already morally psychologically recognize that we don't claim the whole region, but we want to make a more peaceful coexistence? Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Maybe,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I hear you. 非常感谢你说的话. you said that very clearly, and your English is very good. I wish my Chinese was so good. So I would like to visit you very much, and I have been to Dandong and Jilin, and I like 我是东北人，是的. I like the Chinese Northeast. It's I'm also a Northeasterner, so. Professor Wang, I think you make good comments, and I think your argument is very interesting, that China's South China Sea position is evolving, and I think I agree with you. I'm not following it super closely right now, but I agree that there seems to be some movement and some acceptance by China that it needs to compromise on the hard issues, and I think, I might even dare say that China feels stronger. It has, its forces are arrayed. It has all these bases, and that maybe also allows it to make compromise because it doesn't fear. It doesn't fear making a compromise. Sometimes it's easier to compromise when you're strong, and so I think China realizes that if it pushes Philippines too much, if it pushes Vietnam too much, then that will create long-term problems. And that's a more kind of enlightened view. And I think China is slowly coming around to that viewpoint. So I think I would agree with you on that, Professor.
So there are more questions, but I think we need to wrap this up. So I will get the last few questions all together to you, and hopefully you'll be able, you have the last say. So one question is how China-Russia relationship is impacting the U.S.-China relationship. Question number two is it's an interesting question, saying hypothetically, if there is a succession problem in the U.S., will China take the advantage of a leadership vacuum and initiate attack on Taiwan to try to unify with Taiwan? Last question is what you said in your presentation, the return to the Treaty of Westphalia, that each nation is entitled to choose its own political path. To what extent you think the leadership, the elite in the US will accept that? I think that China very welcomes that. And Xi Jinping and others in their speeches, they oftentimes talk about, each nation is entitled to their own political path. And President Carter, in his op-ed in Washington Post, said how China is governing itself and how Chinese people choose their leaders, that's the Chinese business. That's not American business. So I think that's a key for the two relationship, to peacefully coexist, that the two sides probably need to accept each other and particularly to see some value in the other side political system. So to what extent do you think that is going to be received? So no questions, but I noticed there are quite a few Goldsteins in the audience. Maybe your parents, your relatives. So on behalf of all the audience, I want to extend our thanks, for Lyle to give us this brilliant presentation, and thank you for joining us to enjoy this presentation at this very critical moment. So Lyle, you have the last thing.
Okay, sure, Yawei. Yeah, I'll try to make it quick so people can get off to bed. It's so kind of you again to have me, and I appreciate people even all the way from China, but friends around the country and overseas are listening. That's great. Well, let me just make a quick comment on China-Russia relations. It is, I am working on a book. It should be out. We'll send it in next year. And I'll tell you, our take is that Russia-China relations are very strong. Putin said as much recently at the famous Valdai conference. And to me, some Westerners have kind of made the claim that the relationship is brittle. I disagree with that. I think it has really fundamental strength. If you look around at all the dimensions, and they're real, not simply national interests, not simply a common interest in opposing the United States in many circumstances, but also just very practical interests. I mean, they just put two bridges, big bridges, over the Amur River. I mean, it's unbelievable that it's taken so long, but that is a major development for Russia-China relations, and frankly, it's a welcome success for everyone. And I think even if enlightened Americans will see that they don't have an interest in fostering tension between Russia and China. We're actually all better off, actually, in the world if Russia and China get along. Now, that said, I don't think we want to see Russia and China go into a militarized alliance against the United States. I think that would be a dangerous development. But I think people in Beijing and Moscow understand that generally, and they are kind of avoiding this step because they know that would be destabilizing. So I think wise American leadership, enlightened leadership will understand that and move ahead cautiously. You know, we won't pursue a NATO in East Asia. That would be destabilizing. And that would almost surely prompt Russia and China to go into an alliance, a formalized alliance that was against the United States. So I think, I'm hoping both sides will step back from the brink. Now, interesting question about whether China might take advantage of succession difficulties in Washington. Geez, I would prefer not even to speculate on that. That to me is very troubling possibility on all counts. But I guess I would caution that people have underestimated the United States before, so we wouldn't want to make that mistake. But it is a concern. We're all wondering. And by the way, I would say to all my friends from Georgia out there that it's been a very interesting week, thanks in part to Georgia. So very interesting, folks. Now, on the last question regarding Westphalia, though, and wood, you know, I think, yes, in a way, this is a more Chinese viewpoint. It's kind of live and let live. China wants to live a certain way, and Xi Jinping wants China to live in a certain way. Can we live and let live? To me, we can do that. I don't think that's so far from the American approach. We haven't had that viewpoint in a long time, but in a multipolar world where different kinds of countries coexist, and where we try to have a decent relationship with a lot of countries that are different from ourselves, I think Americans need to relearn how to do this. So that's why I'd like to hope that American elites can rediscover Westphalia and the virtues of live and let live. To me, there could be a lot of benefits. By the way, I'm very skeptical of these claims about influence operations across the board. I've been skeptical from the beginning. I think the evidence has been very thin. And so what I'm saying is I don't think that either China or really, frankly, Russia either have undertaken some of these influence operations. I think that's been exaggerated, vastly exaggerated. And so, you know, to me, both those countries more or less do accept the Westphalian premise that countries should sort of stay out of each other's politics. And we should continue to respect those guardrails that will help us to get along with each other. I think so. We need to kind of study up on that again. We're not the only country, but in my view, that will help us find a way toward peace and getting at some of these incredibly difficult issues like climate change, the pandemic, as well as just preventing any kind of great power war. So let me end on that point. I thank you all. Get to bed, everyone, but thanks so much for coming out, and thanks to the Carter Center for having me. I will really look forward to further collaboration with the Carter Center.
Yeah, we have a very engaged audience, and they certainly have lots of questions, but time is up, so we need to end this. We will post the recording. I hope, Lyle, you're fine with that. If you have issues, let me know, so we won't post it. As you said, we don't want you to be out of a job because of the views that you shared with the audience. I think what you said is very beautiful. Live and let live. You know, I hope everyone here will keep in mind that message and also broadcast that message, you know, to the entire community that care about the relationship. I think the two countries, if they work together, they cooperate together, we'll have a much better world, a world of peace and prosperity. Thank you, Lyle. Thank you, the audience, and thank you all. Have a good night and have good morning, good noon in China. All right, bye-bye.